For more, we're joined by Alan Beam, Director of the International and Security Affairs Programme at the Australia Institute. Alan, thanks for joining us this morning. Firstly, strong reactions to French President's calls for Europe to act more independently from the US over China and Taiwan. Some experts even saying his comments were diplomatically dangerous and conceptually wrong. What's your take?
Well, President Macron is, in fact, an extremely gifted political leader. He doesn't say anything accidentally, and he is certainly not stupid. He's not a fool. I think what President Macron is doing is, again, clarifying very well the position of France, which is that it does not want to see any kind of armed conflict in East Asia. And he's also saying that for the European partners, they don't want to see a conflict in East Asia either. So I think what the President of France is really doing is arguing for the status quo and also arguing for moderation and temperance in the way in which people are thinking about this highly problematic and very fast-moving problem.
And Alan, in a worrying development, China is continuing combat training exercises while Taiwan is set to stage its own drills. What's the degree of risk that something can go wrong here?
Okay. Well, of course, there is a degree of risk that something can go wrong here because human beings are involved. And so there's human decision making. That is, in fact, the essential nature of the risk, that something can happen which is either authorised or not authorised, but then provokes a response. You see, this is a very complex and very fast-moving problem, as I mentioned earlier. There's a lot of signal giving going on. A lot of the signals are ambiguous, as you would know, and as your listeners certainly know. Ambiguity has been at the centre of US policy on Taiwan for at least 2 decades now. And where you've got ambiguity, you also have a lack of clarity. So the signal giving being directed towards China by the United States is responded to by China in the way that we're seeing at the moment. Highly choreographed military exercises, which are very visible, they're very potent in their message giving, but at the same time, they're open to manoeuvre, they're open to change, as we saw with the changes to the no-fly zone rules that China suddenly introduced and then suddenly changed. So I think we've got to be very careful that we don't overread this problem, but we must be equally careful that we don't underestimate where the risks lie.
And Taiwan itself is holding drills, but they're much more domestic in nature. They are civil defense drills, with the proportion, though, this time for wartime exercises being ramped up to 70% from 50%. Is there anything we should read into that?
Look, I think there's a lot to be read in that. It is of the nature of politics that anything that impacts on national security will always be played into the domestic political arena. That's just what governments do. It's a way of aligning the domestic population with the government of the day. We see that everywhere throughout Asia, and we certainly see it here in Australia. I think, though, for those of us who have been watching how the people of Taiwan have been responding to this, will note that the people of Taiwan themselves are not particularly concerned about the real threat coming from China, that is, a threat of invasion. The vast majority of people are going about their lives and their business in the way that they normally do. They accept China's basic position that it would prefer peaceful reunification, and they also understand that the Chinese government has from time to time reiterated that it would use armed force if necessary. But that phrase, if necessary, is really, really important here. And to this point, the government of China has not found it necessary, and there are no indicators at the moment that that position is changing in Beijing, and there's no indication that in Taipei itself, the government is imagining that that position is changing or has changed. So what we're seeing is a very ambiguous status quo, but it has inherent dangers in it, as I mentioned earlier.
And Alan, that China is set to set up this no-fly zone, which is likely to be disrupted not just for Taiwan, because Japan came out saying that this latest effort could have implications for what it sees as its own territory. So what's the risk that this could sort of escalate into an international incident?
I think the risk of escalation is reasonably low here, which is, I think, why the government of China moved back so quickly to accommodate the pressures, not so much the ones coming from Taipei. I think China would have kept the 3-day rule in place. But I think that they have responded very quickly to the international community, who are saying to them, look, you can't close down air navigation like that. You can't add to the costs and the time of transiting aircraft from one part of the world to another. You have responsibilities under international aviation law to make sure that we can conduct the civil aviation traffic of the world with minimum disruption. So I think at the moment, all parties are showing moderation and discretion. We have to hope that that continues to be the case. And we also have to hope that from the point of view of the government of China in Beijing, that they also understand that what is for them a significant local issue doesn't spill across into being a major international economic issue. And at this point, I think all parties are treading pretty carefully.
We'll have to leave it there for now, Alan, but thank you so much for your insight this morning. Alan Beam, Director of International and Security Affairs Program at the Australia Institute.